As you can tell, it's time to talk about insurance matters now. And one such man who's an insurance expert is Gari Dombo. He's the MD of Alexander Forbes Insurance. For more on how one needs to be insured from potential losses that can be caused by load shedding or power failures in South Africa, which many of us, Gary, I think you too, we've all been victims of and have experienced in South Africa. But maybe let's take a look at the narrative as to which particular areas could be at risk of the threats of load shedding.
There are a number of areas, Gugu, and in fact, some of those areas we probably are not able to quantify the likely impact of some of those areas. For example, vehicle accidents. That would happen, for example, where traffic lights are out of order. Those are some of the unintended consequences that sometimes we don't really quite realize. But I think more importantly is really the risk that comes through as a result of power failures. To a large extent, we're talking fire risks. We're also looking at power surges. We're also looking at, for example, burglar alarm warranties that are on the policies and burglar alarms not going off. Those are some of the risks that clients would have to attend to. But I think more importantly is also then saying, is there cover, and can a policy be able to respond in the event of a loss?
Let's talk about that cover, because clearly the detail, the devil is in the detail. Sure. Quite clearly here, and that this is where the terms and conditions need to be read and understood. Sure. By the insured to ensure that they are covered when these necessary risks take place. And I take it a typical example would be burglaries and Sure. the alarm system. Sure. Is there a backup for such a facility?
Again, our point of departure is normally that not all policies are the same. So our advice to clients is understand the policy wording that you actually have contracted with the underwriters. If I speak particularly for Alexander Forbes Insurance, would normally cover power surges. But there are other risks that are basically emanate from power failures. If one looks, for example, at the likes of deterioration of foodstuff, and that's probably the minor of the risks, but certainly a risk because there is a loss that accrues to the client.
Is there such a cover, by the way?
There is that cover, Google. The issue is really clients need to understand what is the limit of that cover. And again, it also depends on how long that power interruption was for. If one looks at burglar alarms, for example, there's normally a battery backup. And that battery backup is for a certain period. So I think to a large extent, I think our experience has been that there are few of those claims that come through because the power interruption has been for a fairly short period. But when one looks at fire, I think that's probably our biggest exposure. And there has been a number of incidences that we have encountered as a result of power outages. One of the biggest risks is actually where you then use candles as a substitute for electricity, and then you don't switch those candles off when you go to bed. We've had an incident, for example, where a client had his iron on, and when there was a power outage, he obviously left the iron still connected to the socket and basically went to bed. Sure. But that was close to combustible items, and there was a fire. And we then had damage. We also had a hair blower, for example, where that was left on, and to a large extent, that then had an impact on it ignited a fire that caused quite some huge damage. So those are areas where we find a lot of risks that we have to say to our clients, try and be on the lookout for this. And our advice always is, when there is a power outage, switch off all of your appliances. That's probably the best advice, because you might forget some of the items that may have an impact and may result in damage. One of the other areas is power surge. And yes. Power surge to a large extent occurs when electricity suddenly it's interrupted and then suddenly it comes on. This particularly occurs to items like electronic items like your laptops, computers, etc. And that has also got quite some damage, consequential loss in terms of loss of data, in terms of the damage to the item itself. And key then is, are you covered in terms of your policy? Most all risks policies would be able to respond. Again, where the proximate cause is that authorities did switch off the electricity. Normally, the ombudsman would look at it favorably, and most underwriters would also look at it favorably and actually say, is it as a result of negligence on your part? And if it's not, normally the police should be able to respond.
Speaking of negligence, I take it there's obviously a cost implication here, because instead of getting 100% of the cover or the payout that you could potentially receive, you could take a bit of a knock on that front, right?
You could be asked to contribute by the underwriters. Most underwriters will take a lenient view because, again, it was not particularly of your own making. I mean, the damage would have been as a result of an unforeseen incident on your part. But certainly because there is that contribution on your part, you may be asked by some underwriters to actually contribute to the loss.
Gary, we always hear towards the end of the year or beginning of a new calendar year that a lot of consumers are advised to review their insurance policies to make sure they have the adequate cover. Is now an appropriate time to maybe call up one's insurance provider to find out if they are covered for some of the risks that you alluded to on the back of load shedding? That's
a very important question, Gugu. Yes, we would advise clients to actually review their cover. Engage with your consultant and understand exactly what is covered. Do you have accidental damage cover on your policy? If you don't, then you actually need to ask what is the price to actually get that cover. Some policies automatically have got that cover. With other policies, you have to buy up that cover. So it is important to make an inquiry with your consultant and see whether that cover is in place.
Gary, thank you so much for your time. Always a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you.
That was Gari Dombo, who's the MD of Alexander Forbes Insurance.